Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Low Budget Review Show. I am your host Eric Smith, and today I'm talking about FaceOff, an anthology edited by David Baldacci. Not sure about that. It's from Simon & Schuster and the International Thriller Writers. Alright, so what you have here is, as I said, an anthology, and it pairs up characters from different authors. They pair up two authors, their most famous characters, and they meet in these short stories. So there's a list. I'm going to hold this up. I'm not going to go over everybody, so you can pause and see, if you like, all the authors and the characters that they use. But basically that's it. That's what this book is just a collection of short stories pairing up thriller authors and their most famous characters. Alright, so I picked this book up mainly because it's got a story from co-written by James Rollins. I'm a big fan of his early work. The character that he has is Gray Pierce, the character in this book, and from Sigma Force, I think, something like that. And I actually stopped reading. I've only read, I think, the first Sigma Force book, because I preferred Rollins' earlier stuff that was high adventure kind of craziness. So I picked it up, though, for James Rollins, F. Paul Wilson. He has Repairman Jack in here. I'm a huge fan of Repairman Jack. I have all the adult Repairman Jack books, I believe. Wilson went back and wrote some prequels, for lack of a better term, about Repairman Jack when he was young. And I don't have those, but I do have all the original 14 or however many there are. Haven't finished reading all of them yet. And then Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child, his Pendergast character, is in one of these stories in perhaps the best team-up ever. Douglas Preston, Lincoln Child's Pendergast with R.L. Stine's Slappy the Ventriloquist Dummy. And I'll get more into that in a moment. So, a lot of these authors I've heard of, but have not read. Most of these authors I've heard of and have not read. I have read more than those I've mentioned. But again, I don't need to get into all of that. So the stories themselves generally are entertaining enough. Some, at least especially a couple of the earlier ones, to me are more mystery than thriller, but they're considered thriller authors, so I guess that's fine. And they're characters I'm not that familiar with, so I can't speak to how their novels with these characters are. Those could be straight up thrillers, I don't know. But the stories themselves were kind of mysteries. Not that that's not a critique, just sort of pointing that out. And then you get into some that are a little more thrilling. Again, not saying that like the other ones aren't good. When I say thrilling, I'm speaking felt more like a thriller. The critique I would have is that some of them feel just like sort of set pieces. And I understand these are short stories. There's only so much they can do. And you're perhaps, like me, meeting these characters for the first time, so you need to get to know a little bit about them. And so it's a lot of information to try to put into a short story, especially when you're, again, combining characters. So you have so many, well, in some cases, because you have the main characters and sort of their sidekicks, for lack of a better term, all being introduced. So they're fine stories. They're interesting. They're well written. They just seem sort of condensed, I suppose is the way to put it. Like someone took a 2-hour movie and condensed it to a half-hour TV show. But where was... Oh, there was one. Yeah, some of these I really enjoyed, though. And again, I'm going to go first with R.L. Stine. paired with Douglas Preston, Lincoln Child. And this is a very Pendergast-centered story. It's very different from all the other stories in here. But if you're a fan at all of Pendergast, I think you're going to enjoy this story. He's a great character. It's a very different story. I guess it's closer to a mystery than a thriller. And even then, it's not a typical mystery. It's just I don't want to give it away. It's just different, but it's very, very entertaining. And then we have, I believe it's Jeffrey Deaver's Lincoln Rhyme with John Sanford's Lucas Davenport. I feel like I've read John Sanford, but it would have been years and years and years ago, and I'm not sure. I may have picked up his first Prey book, P-R-E-Y. I may have picked it up but never read it. I'll have to look through my list of books I've read. But and I know I haven't read Lincoln Rhyme, but I really enjoyed that story. And I thought they were, and when I say Lincoln Rhyme, that's the character. Jeffrey Deaver is the author. But I really, really liked that story. Lincoln Rhyme, of course, is from The Bone Collector, the movie with Denzel Washington and I believe Angelina Jolie. I've never seen the movie, but I'm actually interested in maybe checking out some of these Lincoln Rhyme books. I liked his character. And that brings us to Heather Graham's Michael Quinn with F. Paul Wilson's Repairman Jack. Now I already talked about Repairman Jack. I have read Heather Graham short stories before. She's been in some anthologies that I've read, and but I've never read any of her novels. This story makes me want to pick up her Quinn and Cafferty novels and read them. I really enjoyed the character of Michael Quinn. The story was very interesting, the way it all came together. And Cafferty character shows up at the end, but seemed interesting enough, but really don't get much of her. But Michael Quinn was definitely piqued my interest, so I want to check those out. The James Rollins and Steve Barry. Steve Barry's Cotton Malone, James Rollins' Gray Pierce. Definitely a thriller. Definitely felt like a James Rollins story. However you say his last name. Very much one that I enjoyed. And the last story is Lee Child's Jack Reacher and Joseph Finder's Nick Heller. I've never read a Jack Reacher novel. I've not even seen the movies. I don't believe I've read Joseph Finder. But I enjoyed this story. The way it was put together and the chemistry, I guess, between the two characters was very entertaining. And again, not a typical thriller, more of a very much a character piece, but a very good character piece. All of that being said, I think as much as I enjoyed each story, enjoyed meeting these new characters, I think someone who's more familiar with the characters would probably appreciate the stories more than I do. Obviously, I'm interested in getting to know some of these characters better, and I enjoyed the stories with the characters that I already know. You know, those stories got a little bump automatically, pretty much. But and there is an introduction before each story, which tells you about the author, or the authors, tells you a little bit about their characters, sort of how they approached the story, how they were going to get their characters together. Things like the Heather Graham, F. Paul Wilson story, Repairman Jack, is primarily based in New York, while Michael Quinn and Cafferty are in New Orleans. So they talk about a little introduction to each character, each writer, and then this is how they approached it and how they, spoiler, how they brought Repairman Jack down to Louisiana. So that helps a little bit if you're not familiar at all with any of these characters. You've got these nice little introductions. I don't want to get into any detail on any of these stories because, again, with short stories, it's really difficult not to give anything away. Essentially, in the majority of the stories, a case, some sort of mystery, some sort of case, some sort of something comes up, and you end up with either two people, two characters coming at it from different angles and meeting, or one of the characters gets the case or whatever it is, and in following it ends up meeting the other character, and they end up working together. And then there are exceptions to that. There are a couple exceptions. A few, I should say. I don't want to limit it to just two. So not a couple, a few. But again, interesting enough. So, that all being said, excuse me, my rating for the FaceOff Anthology, edited by David Baldacci, I went somewhat literal with the title. My skills are not enough to simply draw someone with their face ripped off, and I couldn't draw all the musculature and everything underneath, so I went with skulls, and I give this 3.5 out of 5 skulls. Again, if I knew some of these characters better, I'm not familiar with the majority of them, maybe my appreciation for the stories would have been a little higher. And while there are a couple of standout stories, the rest, again, I'll say a few, not a couple. The rest were they were fine. Nothing thrilling, no pun intended. So that's why I went 3.5 out of 5. Worth your time, especially if you're a fan of thrillers or mysteries. If you're familiar with any of these characters, and there are other characters, again, that I didn't know that I think are worth getting to know better. Definitely, Quinn and Cafferty is at the top of my list right now from the characters I met in this book that I want to check out. So that's basically it. That's FaceOff from the International Thriller Writers. I keep wanting to call it the Thriller Writers Association, but it's International Thriller Writers. It's worth checking out if you like this kind of stuff. Nothing super groundbreaking. It's an interesting concept. It's been done in other forms. I happen to have another book called Urban Allies that does the same thing with the paranormal characters. So I haven't read that one yet. I think I'm probably more familiar with more of those characters, so it may get a higher rating. We'll see how well it's written. But anyway, that's enough of my rambling. Check it out. Read some interesting mysteries, and maybe meet some new characters, some new writers that you enjoy. All right, so I will have links for the book in the description below, 1 or 2, depending on how many I find. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put them in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers, so if you want to know a little more detail on any of these stories, I know I didn't really talk about any details of any of these stories. So if you want to know anything more specific, we can talk about it in the comments. We'll just post a spoiler warning for those who don't want the surprise spoiled for them. Please like, share, and subscribe. And that's it for this episode of the Low Budget Review Show. I've been your host, Eric Smith, and until next time, read more books.